So I just got the Shutter app back again. I had downloaded it a while ago, or subscribed to it a while ago, and didn't really use it. I downloaded it during quarantine. Didn't really use it at all. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try and watch like maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 movies a week. Um, Preferably classics that I haven't seen that I really want to see, but also just regular movies in general. And just kind of give myself a rant, kind of talk to you about it just for fun because I'm bored. Maybe I'll listen to them at some point. But while I was at work, I watched The Burning, which is kind of like, I don't know if it's really a classic, but when it comes to like horror fans and like slasher fans in general, it's definitely like one of the pinnacles. It's like one of the most popular slasher films. It's definitely like a cult classic. It wasn't like big when it came out, right? Like it came out like in 1981, and the big thing that I had always heard about it was that it was a camp slasher, came out in the early 80s, and it was like a Friday the 13th clone with an asterisk because was it was definitely inspired probably in some of the production, but it wasn't like copied because apparently the guys who created it, Harvey and Bob Weinstein, which is hilarious because was a huge film company, still is, right? But this was their first ever film, which is pretty cool. Another thing that makes this film unique and gives it kind of a cult status, right? But I guess they had already done a lot of the pre-production, a lot of the scripts, everything like that was done before Friday the 13th came out. But I mean, it was still released probably a year later. So I'm sure they took some of the stuff from Friday the 13th, whether it was some of the direction and things like that, and probably influenced it a bit, but it didn't like copy it, which is cool. But basically, this movie has cult status for sure. It's one that if you're a horror fan, you've probably seen it or you at least know what it is. And that was the case, the latter. And I'd never seen it, and it was on Shudder. And I love 80s horror films. I love slashers, so I'm like, all right, let's give it a watch. And I gotta say, I was definitely impressed. I thought it was pretty good. I thought that George Costanza's character, I forget his name. I think I watched it 2 days ago, so it's been a little bit, but I like George Costanza's character a lot. The villain character, I think his name is Glazer. That dude is a piece of shit, and he kind of realized that objectifying and honestly just the way that women were treated, man, like back in the day, or at least like in this movie in particular, all of the men treat the women so misogynistically. It's ridiculous. But the Glazer guy is probably the most hateable character that I can remember in any film I've seen recently. He's awful. He's like a big, tough, strong guy, but he doesn't even look that strong. Like, seriously, like he can probably bench like 200 pounds and probably thinks he's a badass for that. He's just a fucking chump motherfucker. So glad he gets killed. But like the film has like a protagonist, right? Like Alfred or whatever. But he's kind of like a peeping Tom, quiet, creepy kid. He reminds me of like a male version of Pamela from Sleepaway Camp, which is another film I actually haven't seen, but I know of, and I've seen so many stuff about it. I know like that movie in and out without having seen it, which is kind of weird. But that's what watching horror reviews and just horror YouTube in general will do, because synopsis reviews are pretty much the cream of the crop when it comes to horror YouTube. But yeah, he's a weird fucking character. He's not very deep. He's kind of a shitty protagonist. He's a guy though, which is kind of weird. Usually it's a girl, but no, it's the final guy's a guy. Like the last 2 characters in the movie are guys, which is kind of nice actually. It's kind of a cool little change up. And this was one of the earlier slashers, so I appreciate this film's greatness more than I do its quality, if that makes sense. Because I kind of define greatness as being like, you look back on it and you can see how it influenced and what it did in relation to when it came out, and how it was able to, bring light to a subject or bring light to a genre. And while The Burning was not very successful when it came out, I think it was pulled from theaters, it was banned, it didn't really get much traction when it came out. It's definitely looked back on positively, and I definitely think that that's for good reason. I think one of the biggest calling cards, if not the biggest calling card of this movie, is the special effects, the kills. They're fantastic. The gore is great. Tom Savini did this movie instead of Friday the 13th too. That's kind of like a widely known thing. And he was as good as he always is, really. I mean, all of the kills, for the most part, were pretty top notch. The raft scene is one of the most infamous scenes in all of horror, for good reason. It caught me off guard, for sure. I had seen it, but not in its full film context. I didn't realize that he took out 5 people in one little scene. Like, that's crazy, right? Like Cropsy, the killer or whatever, which I'll talk about in a second. That's pretty awesome. Like, that's definitely one of the coolest, best moments, kill scenes in like any slasher film or any 80s horror film I've ever seen, right? Like, I gotta give it credit. Like, if that's the one saving grace of this movie, I think it's worth it. Because not only was it cool, but the effects were brilliant. I love the way you kind of see him hold up the shears. And it's just crazy and it's ballsy. It's just not something you see very often. Like 5, some of the main characters, I think it was George Costanza in the boat. I'm not sure. I don't remember. I have to rewatch it because it was a little vague. I remember there was a bunch of the main characters that you had seen throughout the leading parts up in the movie that were in it. But yeah, there was 5 kills in one scene, which I guess a problem that some people have is that the movie does drag a little bit. There's not too many kills. Like, there's like 9 or 10 in the whole movie, and 5 of them come in one scene. It didn't bother me that bad. The beginning scene with the hooker was kind of weird. Didn't really see the point of it, per se. I guess maybe to build the fact that this guy is going to come back and kill people, I guess. I don't know. Kind of weird, kind of stupid, but eh. And the killer himself, he's not too unique. I do like the shears. I think that's pretty cool. Otherwise, you don't really see him like at all until the very end, in his entirety at least. And like his whole backstory, it's kind of cool, I guess. I mean, once again, you have to realize that this is one of the pioneer films, because it comes off as very stereotypical, a lot of tropes, but once again, this is one of the first ones of its kind, so you have to appreciate that this was kind of not ahead of its time, but it was one of the first, you know? And so I think that that's something you have to think about when you watch this, because yeah, I mean, if you are just a casual horror fan, you watch it, I mean, you probably wouldn't really appreciate it very much because it's not super impactful or standoutish. But the ending where you do get to see the killer, not a huge fan of how he looks. I mean, Eshbal said that he looked like if somebody melted the Pillsbury Doughboy, and I kind of have to agree with that. I thought the early effect in the film, like when they're in the hospital where his arm kind of like grabs the dude, I think that looks pretty badass. And I mean, he didn't look bad, but not that great. And the ending itself, it's okay. It kind of, the film, it's a slow burn, I guess. I mean, it's an 1.5 hour long slasher. But you do spend a lot of time with the, like, counselors and stuff, and there's actually kids at the camp, which is cool, unlike Friday the 13th. And I do gotta admit, I mean, a lot of people talk about how the characters are really likable in this film, and I would have to agree. I think that they are. I like a lot of the characters, and I like a lot of the scenes where they are genuinely bonding and just building character, which is something that a lot of films kind of fail to do these days. And I know it's kind of a stereotype, and it's kind of something that a lot of people talk about when it comes to modern horror films. But I don't know, the 80s, maybe it's just entertaining to watch like 80s films. I love 80s films because I love watching and seeing life, especially 80s slashers, because they're like people of my age. I love watching them socialize, and just in general, I like how film was pre-internet. I don't know, it's just, I've grown up with it my whole life, so I'm fascinated by how life was for somebody like me, my age, without, you know, this giant archive of information, videos, music at my fingertips whenever I need it, pretty much anywhere in the world. But Yeah, all in all, I mean, I would say the biggest issue with this movie, um, some of the plot contrivances are pretty stupid. Um, you know, that hooker scene is pretty. It's dumb, and also the ending fight scene is really not that special. I mean, it's really not. I think the best part about this movie, really, and the reason anybody should watch it, is the kills, and also because it's kind of like a fun camp movie in a way. Um, is it a horror classic? All things considered, given the circumstances of it, I would say yeah. It's a slasher classic. Horror classic? I don't know. Slasher classic? Definitely. And I would give it like a 4 out of 5 or a 3.5 out of 5. Yeah, I'll say 3.5 out of 5. The kills are top notch. I mean, the kills are as good as it gets. And I got to admit, I mean, Glazer, his kill is pretty awesome to the fucking neck. And I mean, the raft scene is just breathtaking and is one of the best horror moments in history, especially slasher. But I would watch it again. Definitely gonna watch it again at some point. And when it comes to 80s slashers, you can do better, but at the same time, pretty damn good.